Okay. Yes. So it's gonna be a couple of questions. So
Sure.
if you're tired or you need
Oh, no,
a
no.
break, just because you yeah, okay. So
You want me to be looking at you or at the camera? I mean,
at
you've
me,
got,
at
yeah,
me,
perfect.
at me
Yeah.
all the time.
Am I okay with this, or should I keep my arm down so you've got a
Maybe the leg down. So you
leg
don't-
down? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
There
so,
you go. Yeah.
right, so forward, just like I'm taught in media training. Forward.
So President Trump has still a lot of support within his base, but also within the GOP. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, first, President Trump is pushing a lot of things that the GOP base likes. The tax cuts are something that Republicans traditionally like. Repealing Obamacare, even if they can't agree on what it means, is something that they like. The appointment of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court makes social conservatives very happy. So the classic Republican voter has a lot policy-wise to like about Donald Trump. And on the personality side, they're simply discounting what they're seeing, that the Republican voter has had an adversarial relationship with the traditional media for going back over 50 years. So barring something that's a little more individually damning than we have right now, the Republican voter is dismissing all of the reports as what the president calls fake news.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but is this extraordinary that, like in the era of Trump, that people are still behind the president, or has it always been like this? That even though there was like a lot of reports about chaotic White House, like Russia stuff, that people still stick with it. Is it extraordinary, or is it normal?
It's partly both. Is that in the United States, partisans tend to stick with their president or their leader until things get really difficult. I mean, Hillary Clinton was an example of that she, in the race, continued, even as most independents had moved away from her after the email scandal, continued to have very high approval ratings among loyal Democrats. But it's also unusual in the sense to the degree to which Republicans seem to be willing to overlook the constant drumbeats of chaos or dysfunction that is originating in the White House. What is happening procedurally has never happened before, in the sense of a president who says what he says and does what he does. And the Republicans to be overwhelmingly ignoring of those factors is a little bit unprecedented. But we tend to be highly partisan and leave our leaders only at the last resort.
So what would the last resort be? What do you think? I mean, I met a lot of Trump voters and I asked them what must happen in terms of Russia or whatever, that you change your mind. And some of them really couldn't think of anything.
Well, I think there are different types of Trump voters and different things will change their mind. But one thing to remember is we've had one president who was forced from office in the middle of his term. Richard Nixon resigned rather than be kicked out through the method that we call impeachment. When Richard Nixon resigned, only about a quarter of Americans liked him, but over 50% of Republicans did. And that was after it became quite clear that Richard Nixon had been engaged in a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. So when we're looking at Donald Trump, I think what you need to have for a significant number of Republicans to leave him is be something that is irrefutable and directly tied to him or his close circle as a violation of the law. Right now you have allegation, you have a lot of smoke, as we would say in America, but not a lot of fire. And the investigations may turn that up, and then you'll see some Republicans begin to depart. But it's going to require something that's beyond allegation or conjecture, but it's more what we had in the Watergate time, really indisputable facts that somebody close to, or in fact the president himself, is involved in illegality.
How important is his defamation of the mainstream media in order to have the support still with his voters? I mean, when I talk to the voters, they all say it's not true. It's the mainstream media. Right. They do stories with one sources. I can do a story with one source. It's completely fake. How important is it for Donald Trump?
Well, it is extremely important. It's what Donald Trump is doing is. In our famous movie, The Wizard of Oz, there comes a time when the wizard is revealed and he says, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, because what we discovered, the wizard is really just a human being. And that's essentially what Donald Trump is saying, is pay no attention to that reporter behind the curtain. Believe me, not your own eyes. And what he's doing through denigrating the mainstream media is giving people who want to believe him a way to framework and process the information they're receiving that allows them to dismiss it. Now, I don't think it'll work in the face of a clear fact that's not simply conjecture or, as I said, smoke. If there's actually a tape that comes out or something that says, hey, we got Donald Trump's financial records and he's X billion dollars indebted to a Russian bank, that's a fact. We don't have that right now. So in the realm of conjecture, he's able to distract people's attention by talking about the mainstream media, and it works with his voters because they want to believe.
Well, let me ask you something a little bit extreme. Why don't these voters think a little bit more for themselves, like making the whole picture, the whole
Well, I
range?
think for a lot of voters, they're getting the policy outcomes that they want. I mean, if Donald Trump were to suddenly turn around and say, you know, I'm not for tax cuts, I'm for tax hikes. Well, that would break faith with a large number of Republican voters. If Donald Trump in the next Supreme Court appointment were to say, I already put a Scalia clone in there, now I'm going to put somebody who can work with both sides. That's not what those voters voted for. But there's an old adage, keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. Your voters can be either your friends or your enemies, depending on what you do, so you might as well keep them really close. And that's what Donald Trump is doing right now on policy, is making sure that there's no rational dissatisfaction with him, in the sense that they can always say, but he's doing what I want, and they can distinguish in their own minds his personal behavior as being less important. He starts breaking with that, and then suddenly they say, well, it's not just that he's tweeting and so forth, it's that he's just a Democrat in sheep's clothing, and I don't want that.
So, my last question to these Trump voters.
So they are thinking for themselves, but it's a different thought process because they have a different priority than non-Republican voters.
So my last question to this Trump voter section would be, so again, how extraordinary is it to have a president that unites his base, his voters so strongly by opposing the media?
I would ask
President.
I would go back to 1998 when Mrs. Clinton attacked the vicious right-wing conspiracy for bringing up the charges and uncovering the fact of the affair with Monica Lewinsky and the perjury. That was never called into question. And that she rallied the Democratic Party by saying, look at the people who you oppose who are trying to bring down this president by using these things. And she called it a vicious right-wing conspiracy, and that mobilized the Democratic Party to keep a president who had acknowledged having an affair with a woman who was less than half of his age and an intern in his office, and had committed perjury in various suits. Again, these are not disputed facts, and allowed them to say, no, actually, we're angrier at the people who are bringing this to our attention than we are at the president who's committed these acts, so we're going to keep him in office.
So let's move to Donald Trump and his work with the GOP in Congress. So how would you describe his successes so far in terms of legislation?
There's been virtually no serious success in terms of legislation. There's been some minor things that are done on the regulatory. Things that he has managed to do are things that did not require legislative action. They required executive willpower. And to that extent, he's had some successes. But legislatively, there's been no signature achievement. And in fact, the difficulty to agree on a replacement for what we call Obamacare, or also known as the Affordable Care Act, just demonstrates that 8 months or 7 months into this presidency, not to have a victory on the #1 priority is virtually unprecedented in modern American presidential annals.
So then we have to ask, what's the reason for that? Is it just Trump, or is it are there rifts within the GOP?
There's huge rifts within the GOP. That I don't remember that 5 years ago they would have used the words aggressive, but it's even with some of the other things. But there's a lot more of the non-factual models to be called news stories as opposed to opinion pieces or opinion journalism. Questioning. I don't remember that happening 10 years ago. I mean, certainly in the Clinton administration, people were talking about the
Nach wochenlangem Scheitern wollen viele Republikaner im Senat jetzt endlich irgendetwas verabschieden, was einigermaßen nach Abschaffung von Obamacare tönt. Und auch eine sehr abgespeckte Version würden Sie und Ihr Präsident als Mini-Erfolg verbuchen, denn Sie könnten sie möglicherweise in der Einigung mit dem Repräsentantenhaus wieder verschärfen. Die Chance, dass die Republikaner mit ihrem Präsidenten also doch noch zu einem Erfolg kommen, besteht weiterhin.